All right, 166. And I just want to start out by noting that I think our current situation is the biggest disruption of everyday life in America since the end of World War II. I don't think anything that's happened in the 75 years since World War II has really, changed what we do. Life has changed in 75 years, but in terms of what our lives usually are, day to day, year to year, this seems like bigger than anything. Not, Vietnam didn't disrupt our lives. The various, stock market corrections, crashes, 9/11, shocked everybody, but the president, made a speech where he said, we should behave as normal, we should go shopping, keep the economy going. So what do you think, Lance?
Well, that's one of the main reasons that Trump is trying to get the schools open. Since we last spoke, uh, there was a Fox News is going with this. I heard it from three of their reporters, and I've also read this. I can't provide to you right now the study, but there have been so many things that I've read now, article after article, saying that kids get the virus, but they almost never get sick from it. It's under the age of 10, maybe three in the United States since January have died. And new evidence. They did a study of it was several hundred kids, and they had them with adult teachers, and none of the teachers got infected from the kids. And that's what the study was for, to find out if kids transmit it. And so there's very little evidence that kids are going to give this virus to the teachers. And so, one thing that will get a lot of people back to normal is to let their kids go back to school. That's millions of kids in the United
It's
States.
tens of millions of kids. You want to do this experiment with I don't know 30 million people, 1/5 of whom work in schools like my wife, who very much aren't kids. And
Well,
I really haven't set out what the big deal about getting America back to behaving as if everything's normal, why that's a big deal, more to conservatives than to liberals. Because if everybody goes back to work with some precautions and back to school, and the number of cases and the number of deaths don't explode, then it doesn't look nearly as bad um, for Trump. Now, we could argue about, how responsible Trump is for, what COVID has done in this country. Um, but regardless of, how much blame Trump, you know, actually should be assigned, and of course, as a liberal, I'm going to say he should take a lot of the blame, and as a conservative, you should say, no, there was all this other stuff too. Um, Regardless of how much actual blame should be assigned, he's the president while this is going on, so people will look to him, will evaluate him, based on the condition of the country.
yeah,
Um,
you've been saying that. May I? Are you done?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay. You've been saying that for a while because it's obvious that, you know, Nancy Pelosi calls it the Trump virus. So there's no doubt that the Democrats want to pin this on Trump. Um, the rational people I know are saying that this came from China. I've talked with Democrats that don't even believe it came from China.
Well, they're dumb. It
Now,
fucking came from China. I mean,
okay,
we
well,
should start like evaluating things in the light of common sense rather than in the
okay,
light of fucking
dumb
distant.
people, yeah, that's fine. But my point is that you're doing to me what you don't want done. You're saying I want the country to go back to normal so Trump can be reelected, and I'm saying that maybe you want the crisis to remain a crisis so that Biden will be elected.
Well, I mean,
So
that's a
which of
fair
us is?
counter argument to make. Sure.
But I'm saying that regardless of our motives, maybe you're an evil person, maybe I'm an evil person. Uh, the best thing for the country is to get back to work because we can't, even if this virus is a little worse than I keep thinking it is. I mean, I'm not God. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's a little worse than I've been saying. I know for certain that if we stay like this, the country will be destroyed. So I'm sorry, Rick, but I can't go there with you. Even if it helps Trump, we still need to get America back to work.
Well, the country wasn't destroyed in 1918, 1919, when the virus raged for 15 months.
Well,
And
you can't possibly compare America of 1918 with America of 2021. What if we continue this lockdown, we're going to go into a depression. Now, I don't know what whether that bothers you, but I don't want my country going into a depression. It's very serious.
well, I mean, yeah, I mean, depression obviously is fucking bad. Um, but the deal is if people could do what people in other countries have done, which is like thoroughly, and what we should have done early on, which is thoroughly locked down for 3 weeks, 4 weeks,
Yeah.
then the virus loses opportunity to infect new people and it dies off.
Yeah,
Um,
you've been presenting that for every liberal I know right now says we should have locked down. It's those wascally Republicans that wanted to run around and spread the virus,
well, it's not
and
just
now
Republicans.
and then we opened up too soon, and now it'll never go away. I've heard this phrase. Is there a transmitter that's going into all the Democrats' brains that says
No,
if
it's just fucking
only we'd
logic.
locked
The
down?
deal,
No, it's
yeah.
not logic. It's not logic because um, we did lock down from March until late until after April until May. There was a stay-at-home policy where not only could you not go into a store without a mask, but there was a stay safe at home. There was a in Los Angeles, we weren't allowed to leave the house unless we were picking up groceries or going to a doctor or getting gas for our car. We weren't even allowed. Do you remember the stay-at-home order?
Yeah, but
It
I
wasn't
stayed at
severe
home as
enough
much as
for
that.
you.
What's that?
It wasn't severe enough for you.
Well, people's individual behavior wasn't. Well, a couple things. One is, well, if you're going to lock down, then and you knock down the number of cases, and we did that not as well as a lot of European countries and some
How do
Asian
you know?
countries.
How do you
No,
know?
but well, because you can look at the curve of new daily cases.
No, no. We were locked down. I have
No, just
people,
look at the
right? I
case.
have customers. I lost every student I had. They were all. I had 20 people. Every single one of them was locked down. And
Well,
then,
you didn't let me finish. The deal you need locking down, and then you need contact tracing and adequate testing, and then the three of the things they all go together, and they have to kind of be done all at once. And uh, without the contact tracing, the locking down has to be much more severe, and you need much closer to 100% compliance. And I've been out, I mean, I don't know, I go out a few times a week. Carol goes out almost every day, sometimes multiple times a day, and we see, and this is LA, and LA is probably 85% Democrats. I don't know, some huge number. There are very few Trumpers that you see in LA. But even among Democrats and liberals every third person you see on the street isn't strictly following protocols. Now, you've argued that if you're running alone on the beach, that you should be able to run without a mask. And, I can buy that argument. But we see people on the street, along Ventura Boulevard. We see people outside of restaurants. You can still eat outside. You can't eat inside. And we see people, running along the streets here where they're passing people, and every third person is fucking it up, mask-wise. So I would argue that we never really had anything close to a super tight lockdown. Certainly not across the whole country, and we didn't have the contact tracing that's supposed to go with it, where you knock down the number of cases, and the cases that you do have, you give people an incentive in some cases, like a $20 gift card. You say, look, you tested positive. Now tell us, who you've had contact with in the past, I don't know, week. And then you contact those people and you tell them to get tested. We never really had most of the pieces of that solidly in place. But it's still doable. We can still do that. It's not like things are so dire that those things wouldn't work.
Okay, well, I unlike yourself, I have a range of people that I deal with during the week. I've never observed the lockdown. As much as possible, I've continued to see people, and none of us have died. I have classes during the week. None of the people in the classes are dead. And what I deal with is people that are not afraid. And I understand that if you've had health problems, you have a good reason to be afraid. So I'm not insulting anybody that is taking precautions. But I deal with a range of people, some of whom have no concern, like myself, because I know my odds are about 10,000 to 1. And then I deal with people like yourself. I'll take you out of it because you have legitimate health problems you were concerned about, but I deal with a lot of vitally healthy people that are terrified. I have
Are they terrified for themselves, or are they terrified for their loved ones? Because I've got an 87-year-old mother-in-law and an 86-year-old mom. And
you're interrupting
okay,
me.
all
Go
right.
ahead, finish your point.
I'm just asking, are these people that you deal with?
I know, for example, of a 25-year-old man, and this fellow is statistically, it's almost unheard of for a 25-year-old man to get this and die. It does happen. It registers on the CDC. As I said last week, there have been a few hundred in the entire United States his age that have died. A few hundred of the 140,000 people that have died. Only a few hundred people his age, and those people most likely had comorbidities like obesity or diabetes, etc. Anyway, he is double masked everywhere he goes. So if he leaves the house, it's like a sci-fi movie. He wears a mask and a face shield, and he wears very thick gloves. Now, he does this everywhere he goes. So he's literally not had any, so he hasn't been closer than 6 feet to anybody since March, and hasn't left the house without this spacesuit on. Now, he has created, they call it a bubble, which, no, it's a pod, or there's a name for it, where he has 6 other friends, and they all do the same thing.
Yeah.
They've all pledged to wear a spacesuit and not get closer than 6 feet, and they hang
Are
out
they
with
able to
each
interact
other.
with each other because they've been?
I think that's the idea, that they're able to isolate themselves, and when they do interact, they interact out in wooded areas where there isn't anybody for miles.
Yeah, my
Now,
university is opening up on a pod basis come
okay,
fall.
all right. So what I'm saying is, I believe that this man is been driven nuts. I think a lot of people, and there's no point reasoning with him. I mean, when you've got to explain to a 25-year-old, look, it's 10,000 to 1. It's more than 10,000 to 1. For a 25-year-old, it's more like, I don't know, it's more than 10,000 to 1 that you'll die. Um, and no amount of research or reasoning will get through to them. But the one thing I found is they all say the same thing. These robots, these hypochondriacs, these lunatics that have been terrified by the Democrat media, they all say, we just need, if only we had really locked down, I mean really locked down, nobody leave the house without a spacesuit. Everybody contacted, every human being, armies of contact tracers, tests for 330 million people. If only we had done that. And we only would have to do it for 3 weeks. Damn the economy, damn the kids. Who cares if we go into a depression? Nothing is more important than this complete lockdown. And they all say this, and when they start talking like that, I don't argue with them. Because I just figure this person I'm not dealing with their conscious mind anymore. I'm not dealing with logic or rationality. I'm talking to the lizard brain now. There's a part of the brain that is reptilian, that is so terrified that they can't listen to reason. So, Rick, I'm sorry that you feel this way, but it's an idiotic solution.
All right. So, there's a couple things. We have one difference between now and 1918, which is we're going to get a vaccine. And if we're lucky, some people, it may come by, I don't think we'll have enough for a significant chunk of the population by the end of 2020. But if we're lucky, we'll be able to start vaccinating, vulnerable segments of the population by, I don't know, the end of the first quarter of 2021. So, we may have a shorter run of this shit if we have a vaccine that's at all effective, a shorter run than the Spanish flu, 1918, 1919. Now, another thing, you mentioned your friend's 25 years old.
Yeah.
My daughter is 25 years old.
Okay.
And she's in London, where this shit ran rampant because England is also run by idiots. Boris Johnson is the prime minister, and for a while England was taking a stab at herd immunity. We're just going to go about our business, and it ran rampant. And my kid thinks she might have had it, but she didn't get tested, and now it's a couple months after she thinks she might have had it, and now she's got chronic fatigue syndrome. She sleeps all the time. So you talk about the odds that a 25-year-old will be killed by this stuff. But a study showed that 7 people out of 8 who caught it, who were who were tested and had it, 7 people out of 8, 2 months after the diagnosis or after the onset of symptoms, they still have symptoms. So somebody can have it, somebody can even be asymptomatic, and 2 months later not be up to snuff. My kid, maybe it's something else. She should go get tested for antibodies if that's a thing they do in England, which I assume it is. So she has a better idea, but she she is suffering definite
Yeah.
effects, and possibly because of the COVID.
Well, another thing about these Democrats that I was telling you
Yeah.
is that every single one of them thinks they had it. I have not spoken to a single Democrat that doesn't tell me that story. They all say,
Did they go to
yeah,
the doctor? Did they get
I
an
was,
official
oh no,
diagnosis?
no, no, no. That's the problem is that part of the insanity, part of the neurosis is there's always an excuse not to get a test. It's like, well, it's too expensive. That's $100, or I'd have to wait in line, or it's just not efficiently given. So they walk around imagining that way back in January they got it, and now they're walking around with this stuff.
Well, I mean,
And
my daughter, she hasn't gotten a test, but she did go to the doctor and sat down,
wow,
and so she has an official diagnosis of something like chronic. I don't know if it's officially chronic fatigue syndrome, but it's a diagnosis of whatever the official term for that shit is. She has that shit.
well,
Now,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
that's it. I mean,
Make
like,
it,
should she
no,
take the other next step and, like, get the antibody test? Will that give her
I don't know
further information? I
why
don't know.
why wouldn't she?
I
What
don't know.
reason is
I
there
should
not
ask
to?
my wife, like, why isn't she getting that test? Or why
If
didn't the
it
doctor,
bothers her,
like,
because
why didn't the
I think
doctor assign her that? I
because
don't know.
maybe the doctor is less hysterical than the average Democrat. I mean, I'm not trying to be rude to you, but what I'm saying is I know a lot of people that are experiencing fatigue and unpleasant symptoms because they don't want to be locked down anymore, and they're afraid that they're going to die from this new plague. And if I had any suspicion that I had it, I would go get a test. It might take a few days to get the appointment. It might cost $100, but I would take the
No, you
test.
can.
It's no
There are
big
ways to
deal.
get tested where you don't pay for it.
Yeah, there you go. Now, one last thing, and then I think the audience is tired of this COVID thing. I just want to reiterate very, very briefly that every week I've discussed with you more cures. They're partial cures. What they do is they cut down the death rate by, some doctors say they can cut it down to, they can cure 98% of the people that walk in. Some doctors say that they can cure half. Some people say we can increase your chances 30% conservatively of surviving this if you come to my clinic and you have the COVID. But I have maintained now for since I think June, early June, that if I was the governor of the state, I would simply, there's 40 million people in California. To give people an idea, there's only 55, 60 million people in Britain. So California is a big place. It's as big as most countries. And if I was the governor, I would just say, look, we're going to lock down all the places with elderly people, really lock them down. We're going to lock down people that have, we're really going to take good care of people that have diabetes, respiratory symptoms, obesity. I might even mandate mask wearing in some locations. But then I would say, I'm going to put billions of dollars into testing the 6 best medications out there that we have pretty good studies showing that they work. Now, I'm not going to mention any medication that Democrats hate because I know that it's political now. Democrats will use remdesivir but they won't use hydroxychloroquine. So I won't even say that word. I said it once, but you don't have to respond. You can take remdesivir or something else, the Oxford steroid for the cytokine storm. But there is budesonide, there is remdesivir, there are quite a few steroids because most people die from the cytokine storm, and they know how to stop. They know how to stop that. That
In some cases, I'll talk about
they
that
can.
because I looked at the numbers.
All right. Well, look, please don't talk about that because unless you feel like that's fine. But my point is this: I would say I'm the governor of California. I'm gonna have the state of California use these medications. And I believe that all of these doctors and all of these studies can't be lying. You may hate them. You may think they're Republican plants or some kind of plot against Democrats. But I would say, look, we've got 6 medications that show success, and I'm going to do them all in the state of California. And I'm going to mandate that doctors use them. They don't have to, it doesn't matter which one, but you have to use one of them. I don't know how they would do that, but I would tell all the pharmacies and all the doctors, load up on these medications because they're cheap and plentiful, and every clinic in California would have them. And after everyone was loaded up with these medications, I would say, lockdown over. Go out, live your lives. If you get sick, show up at a doctor within 4 or 5 days, and we have medication that will probably cure you. And that would be the end of it.
All right. So every week you say that, and every week I say this. I looked at the study of the Oxford steroid, which everybody is excited about because its level of effectiveness, and the level of effectiveness of each of these, what you call cures, the Oxford steroid lowers your chance of dying if you end up on a respirator by 1/3. And all these drugs, including the Republican drug, and some these drugs, like they work at different points in the illness. Like if you wait to go to the hospital until you're pretty bad off and you end up on a respirator, then it's good news that there's this steroid because it reduces your chance of dying by 1/3. Only 2 people die on respirators given these steroids compared to 3 people who die without the steroid. And this other stuff is effective early on. Like hydroxychloroquine might offer the same kind of reduction in mortality, or remdesivir, if you catch the stuff early. That you don't need to go on a respirator. You give people this stuff, and their eventual mortality is cut down by 20 to 40%. But you do have to look at, now I looked up, there are about 950,000 doctors in America, almost 1 million. So it's not like there are just a few doctors who are so overwhelmed that they can't keep up with the latest developments in this stuff. That we can assume that in most cases, people are getting state-of-the-art treatment for this stuff if they get to a hospital. And we can look at the actual numbers.
Actually, we can't assume that, by the way, because the doctors that I've heard that are interviewed I've heard doctors say that the pharmacy won't give them medications that the pharmacist doesn't believe in. There are laws in certain states, gubernatorial edicts in certain states. There are doctors that are confused about the studies. They're hearing one thing from one study and one thing from another. We do not have in place uh, an adequate the medication is not widely distributed and trusted, and they don't know what
I
to read,
don't know,
and
but I
they're afraid,
assume
and
that
they're
I would
afraid of being sued for malpractice,
I
and they're afraid of
assume
being sued for
I
malpractice.
assume that you said there are 6 drugs. I'd guess that there are even more than that. That because there are the standard antivirals that don't even get discussed much that offer some reduction in mortality, like on a range of I don't know 15 to 20%. And so people are being given shit. People have always been given drugs, and I assume that the we can see that as time goes on, because we've been dealing with large numbers of cases for about 4 months now. So doctors are getting better at treatment protocols
They
over
are,
time.
and
You can see it.
that's why the mortality rate is going down.
But let's talk about the actual mortality rate. So the mortality rate is the number of people dying in America this past week is about 40% of what it was at when it peaked, when daily deaths peaked in April. And the number of people testing positive, the number of new cases found is roughly double what it was in April. So we're looking at a mortality, you know, ratio of deaths to new cases of about 1/5 of what it was in April. But still, 1,000 people or Americans are dying every day. And um, I'd say that part of the reduction in mortality is locking old people away. Um, and old people learning I've got my mom who's 86 stays the fuck home. My mother-in-law who's 87 and isn't as smart as my mom is at least in a senior living center where they do the locking down for her, and they have extreme protocols. Even though the protocols haven't worked 100% because they've had fucking 5 people in that home come down with it, and I think 6 workers there come down with it, but at least their protocols are good enough that they've managed to isolate those people so they didn't infect the whole fucking place. But it's a combination of better protocols, better you know better use of drugs and maybe some better drugs, and locking old people away. But we're still losing. There were 4 consecutive days this week for the first time in 2 months where America lost more than 1,100 people a day. And that's an annual rate of 400,000 people a year. I did some more math, and the coronavirus is among the 4 deadliest events in U.S. history, and it's number 2 in U.S. history in the in the rate at which Americans are dying from it. Um, uh, Only the Spanish flu uh, killed more Americans per month than this shit is.
Well, I mean, all of your numbers that you predict are based on the idea that the spike that we had that started a week or two ago is just going to keep going up and up and up.
No, I'm saying
Um,
steady because I'm not claiming that.
okay, because one of the whenever I have this argument with people, it's a little frustrating because the pessimists say that it's just going to keep going up, and the optimists say, nah, it has just as much likelihood of just going down. So we can't base because if you're pessimistic, you could say, oh well, 1,000 a day. That means in 5 years, everyone in America will be dead. I mean, it might go away. It might start going down. So I think it'll be like every other illness that eventually people. I have to say this, and this is the most terrifying thing, and this is the absolute last thing I'm going to say about it, and that is that people might just have to learn to live with it. They might have to just say to themselves, look, there's a 10,000 to 1 chance that I'm going to get this thing that kills me. I could also get hit by a bus,
Yeah, well,
I could
that's
get
what
hit
Mark
by lightning.
Meadows, the White House chief of staff, said on one of the Sunday news shows this morning.
Well,
There's
he's
some,
right. He's right. That's what happens. I mean, I'm going to mention again because you always go to the 1918 pandemic. In 1968, we lost 116,000 Americans to the Hong Kong flu. And in today's numbers, that would be 160,000 because there was a third less people in America. And I'm sorry to tell you this, Rick, but Americans back then were sturdier people. They were not, don't interrupt me, it was a different character. Americans had a different character, and they knew that life was full of risks.
they were
And
more willing to die, or they were more used to dying. If you,
yeah, they were. They were. The modern American is pampered and expects everything to be taken care of for them, and that life will never have any risks. They think there will be a warning sticker on every product they buy, and that every doctor will be able to cure them. And if they get sick, there's going to be someone they can sue. And we're softer now. And
modern
part of
Americans don't
part
want
of
to die if they don't have to.
I understand that, Rick, but part of my problem with all of this, and I don't think this is a new fact, is or at least a new opinion that I'm expressing today. Part of my problem with this is that I worry about my fellow Americans. I actually think to myself, so in 1968 we had the Vietnam War, we had riots in the streets, and we had the Hong Kong flu. But people moved on. They lived their lives, and they weren't afraid. I'd never heard a word about it. I was alive in 1968. I didn't hear anything about it. People said, "Oh, you could catch the flu." I remember people said things like, "Man, something's going around. Make sure you don't get the flu." But they lived their lives. Don't interrupt me, because I'm leading to the fact that I worry about my fellow Americans. I think that this need to be completely safe all the time has led to this lockdown, and it's going to lead to more lockdowns. This won't be the first. And I'm hoping that Americans learn their lesson, that they can't panic like this, but I'm afraid they won't. I'm afraid that next year there will be another virus, and the Democrats will want to lock down again if Trump is president. And
Well, he
eventually,
won't. He won't be.
eventually, the Americans will simply have a season every year where for a month we lock down. I think that I don't want to live in a country like that. I would consider my fellow Americans to be hysterics.
Well,
I would much prefer to live with Americans that were willing to take their chances than Americans that lock down America 1 month out of every year.
Well, I don't think America will lock down for a month every year, but in the future, we may become more like a Korea or Japan, where people wear masks during flu season. Not everybody, but like the maybe like 20% of everybody. And people are more likely to stay home if they have sniffles during flu season. And in the 1930s, there was a famous what was the name of the famous photographer in the 1930s? I want to say Wee Wee or Weg. I don't know. There was a guy, Ouija.
I don't.
This guy was a famous photographer, and he'd go around to car wrecks, and he'd just take pictures of dead people from car wrecks. And in the 1930s, dashboards were metal, no seat belts, no airbags. If you got in a wreck going more than 35 miles an hour, you go through the windshield. I don't know if there was safety glass either, and you're
Yeah,
fucking dead.
yeah, a lot of
Now,
decapitation.
what's that?
People would be decapitated by the
Yeah, a lot of
windshield.
shit would. I mean, um, and now we have the technology that you can still drive like an asshole, but you don't have to die. Because, not just, I mean, the first seatbelts, the seatbelts we grew up with, I believe nobody wore seatbelts in the 60s. I remember a family trip from Albuquerque to Disneyland, and we're in this huge fucking station wagon, and we're going 100 miles an hour across, I don't know, what is it, I-40? I don't know. But anyway, there's six people in the car. Nobody's got a seatbelt on. People are sprawled across, every which way, and we're literally going 95 to 100 miles an hour. We're catching air off the humps in the road. The roads were better back then. We had better infrastructure for hauling ass. But still, if we'd gone off the road, the whole family, maybe one person would have survived. Um, and now cars have what, like 8 different airbags? If you get in any kind of fucking wreck where your airbags deploy, your car is totaled even if only one fender is fucked up, because just replacing those airbags, those 8 airbags, is like $3,000. But we do it because uh, we don't have to die, and we have the technology that we don't have to die in car wrecks.
Yeah,
And
and go ahead.
yeah, does that make us softer? Yeah, but like we
No,
have a lower tolerance for risk. Back
yeah,
in
but
1900, the average lifespan in America was 40 years old, which is deceptive because a lot of that was infant mortality. But if you made it into your adult, if you made it, into your teen years, your life expectancy was probably 62. But now it's 1/3 higher now, and we're less, we put up with less unnecessary dying.
yeah, but you see, you mischaracterized my argument. I'm simply saying that thank God we have technology that has created half a dozen therapies, all of which increase your chances of surviving the China virus. And thank God we have access to it because it's cheap and plentiful. And I have no objection to people that are worried about it staying home and wearing masks. My objection is that crazy people have taken over the government of California and are trying to destroy the economy because they want Trump to lose the election. And they're forcing me to stay in my house, and they're forcing all kinds of crazy lockdowns, causing a depression, businesses to go out of business. When I mean, a great example, which every conservative says, it's almost a cliche at this point, the governor aided and abetted hundreds of thousands of protesters who wanted to go out and riot shoulder to shoulder, many of whom weren't wearing masks because it made a political statement he agreed with. All of a sudden, the virus didn't matter to him at all. But if you were just a normal person trying to run your business, well, suddenly that was a threat to America's health. Do you
Well,
know the governor of
we're past
California has shut down all the churches? So the governor of California has said it's okay to go to a protest or a riot, but it's not okay to go to church. Did
Really,
you
did he
know that
say it was okay to go to the riot?
absolutely. He said, in fact, when they check people, these what's the word for it? When they check up on all the people, you want them to follow up the checkers, whatever they are.
Contact tracing?
Yeah, contact tracers are by law in California not allowed to ask if you went to a protest because protests are good. They didn't shut down any of those protests. There were massive rallies and streets covered with people. They didn't shut them
how
down.
would you shut down a protest with 80,000 people? How do you
Well,
do that?
it's easy enough to do. It's easy enough to do. As you know, my vast experience, I went to one protest, and
Had 300
they
people.
the it had around 600 people, and the police can form a line. They can form barriers with their cars and their bodies, and then they just start pushing you towards where they want you to go. And then they start arresting people that resist, which gives a lot of inspiration to the other people who say, I don't know if I want to spend the night in jail. And after a while, the protest stops. So
Yeah,
they could do that if they
the
want to.
one that filled up like 8 blocks of Hollywood Boulevard that had, I don't know, 50,000, 60,000 people there. You can't shut that down.
You could shut it down. You not only could you shut it down, but the main thing is that I didn't hear any governor or mayor or anybody say one word against it. Say, look, we've got a virus here. You guys are super spreaders. We're going to have a spike. And by the way, Rick, you're supposed to be the scientific, logical one. Don't you think it's an odd coincidence that we had a massive spike in California 3 weeks after the riots and the protests and the marches with 80,000 people?
Okay, sure. All right.
All right. So, I mean, weirdly, I think we can get back to our lives, but I don't think that we need shoulder to shoulder marches where with 80,000 people. I mean, maybe we can just go to our offices and do our work. So, anyway, do you have anything else to say about
Yeah, just
this?
one thing is that, California hasn't been, I mean, it's still tough on a lot of businesses, but in terms of what individual people want to do, California hasn't been, except for going to gyms, and I guess going to church. All the gyms are closed again, which I agree, even though I belong to 3 different gyms. Um, I agree with it because I went to those gyms during the short period when they were open again, and people were acting like fucking assholes. No, you're supposed to be masked up in there, and everybody had their fucking masks like dangling from one ear. Or one guy, I saw one day he had the mask with his nose out. The next day he had it over his nose with his mouth out. And these people doing aerobic shit and huffing and puffing away. I'm glad they took my choice away because I was still tempted to go to those gyms, but people were fucking spraying droplets all over the place. But besides those things, I know Carol and I went out to dinner last night, and I mean, it's I don't like it because I'm more paranoid than Carol. I had as the place we went early, so there wouldn't be many people in it, and as the place filled up, we switched tables so we'd be a little more distant from everybody. Um, 'Cause fucking the place, I won't give the name of it, but it should be called House of People Who Shouldn't Be Going Out to Dinner because we were the youngest people in there. It's a place that it's a great fucking place. In the before times, the last time we went there, we saw Tina Fey and Amy Poehler. So I mean, and famous people know they go to good places. But like anyway, you can go out to dinner. You just have to eat on a patio, and be nervous that fuck. But I
Let
can
me
go to
ask you.
Mike and
Yeah,
buy shit, do
yeah,
craft.
yeah. There's another lockdown, Rick. I realize that in your personal life, every week we go over the places you're able to go, but there are a lot of places locked down and a lot of people going out of business. I assure you. Even
Yeah,
though
I
in your
just
little
yeah.
world it doesn't touch you, I see these people. I know these people. I know lots of people that have lost their jobs and they're not getting their jobs back. And it's because of this insane lockdown that is not affecting you. Now, I'd like to ask you a personal question, and since we filmed in the fucking hospital, I don't know why you wouldn't answer it. You didn't have any immunodeficient. Your immune system isn't compromised, is it? They
No,
just
it seems it
cut it
seems
out.
fine. It's almost I've got almost
And
too
wait,
many of certain immune cells.
you
Um,
didn't get any chemo or radiation, right?
no.
Well, then you don't have anything to worry about.
Well, A, I'm 60, which gives me a slightly
You're the same
elevated
age as
risk.
me. You're the same
Yeah,
age as me, and I'm not
and
worried.
B, they took a thing out of my kidneys, and they said my kidneys are not, you know, pristine. And
No, well,
uh,
whose are?
kidney dis kidney disease is also is a comorbidity. So, you
All
know, my
right.
risk isn't that
Okay.
elevated. It's
All right.
probably only like double like Joe 48-year-old's risk.
All
Um,
right. Okay. Fair
but
enough.
I don't want to be Joe 48-year-old either and catch this shit,
All right.
regardless of whether I die.